Palma, sorry.
That's okay. Firstly, thank you for the possibility to show the youth perspective above food systems. And thank you to create this democratic space. To contextualize our situation, the current political situation in Brazil is worrying in several aspects, including the food and nutrition agenda. Jair Bolsonaro's first day in office took the first major step towards dismantling the national agenda. The solution of CONSEA. CONSEA is the National Food and Nutritional Security Council, has an affront to democracy and compromise for guaranteeing the human right to adequate food. The unfolding COVID-19 food crisis has highlighted the disruption of economic, social, and political power, as well as the difficulty in facing social injustices affected by the conditions of class, race, and gender. It also demonstrated the actions of the government associated with the ruralist interests in developing livestock production in areas devastated by the fires that occurred this year in rural areas. To talk about our group, NATRA is a university popular and communicative extension group in the campus of Unesp Africa, Brazilian University, Unesp. Our work and our study is focused on agrarian issues from the perspective of popular education, highlighting here that popular education addresses an emancipatory point of view of the performance and teaching inside and outside the university. This means that actions seek social transformation in the exchange of knowledge between academic knowledge and popular knowledge. In this sense, the group has worked both in the school of the rural settlement Fazenda Boa Sorte, as well as in the struggle to give visibility to this settlement and help in the flow of its production. The group had already been working on the initiative to support the flow of production from the Fazenda Boa Sorte within the university space. But in the pandemic context, the way to make the flow viable was to resort to donations and participate in financial notice, so it was possible to assembly of food baskets. These baskets are delivered to families with social vulnerability in the municipality of Franca. The systematization of the families that receive the baskets is responsibility of Social Action Secretariat. This secretariat, it's an institution in the municipality itself. Subsequently, the project obtained funding from Instituto Fiocruz, which allowed the project to continue throughout the year. Institute Fiocruz, it's a research institute here in Brazil in the field of public health. The objective of our project is that it becomes a public policy in the municipality. Considering that through municipal institution, it's already possible for this to happen. And also considering that Franca, our city, it's a commercial city. And with the commercial closure, many families have lost a large part of their income, which makes a public policy of food security so necessary here. I have ended my speech.
Ali, you're muted.
Thank you, Gabriel. I think it is a good initiative that you are taking, and I think this is the way we want it now. We want all our youth to be involved. So thank you so much. Thank you for highlighting the challenges and maybe some of the recommendations that you people are doing in that part of the world, Brazil. From this now, I think I will move to the next presenter, who is Margarita Margarita Gomez, who is one of the co-coordinators of the CSM youth working group. So Margarita, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, espero que me puedan escuchar. Mi nombre es Margarita, soy de Argentina, del Movimiento Nacional Campesino Indígena, del blog Vía Campesina Argentina. Bueno, en esta pregunta me voy a referir mucho a las acciones que estamos realizando los jóvenes en Argentina y también conociendo un poco también la realidad de los jóvenes en el mundo, de las acciones que estamos realizando en este marco de la pandemia, ¿no? De una crisis sanitaria que está viviendo en el mundo, y no solamente eso, también se agrava las situaciones de las juventudes y de los migrantes en todo el mundo, ¿no? Entonces es uno de los trabajos también que se está haciendo, poder seguir trabajando en las comunidades para el arraigo de la juventud en los territorios, en sus comunidades, poder trabajar con la juventud del campo y de la ciudad, ¿no? Que se puedan conocer las dos realidades, para que los jóvenes puedan conocer el campo y poder la vuelta al campo, ¿no? Otra de los trabajos que estamos haciendo como juventudes, no dejar el trabajo de las bases, ¿no? Que visitar a las familias en algunos lugares donde estamos con aislamiento social, otros lugares que dependen, digamos, de los lugares en la que estamos. No todo el país está pasando el mismo, sino en algunos está más flexible que en otros lugares, ¿no? La juventud también se ha visto en la necesidad de poder armar bolsines de alimentos, ¿no? Lo que tienen que ver verduras, carnes, huevos, frutas, para poder hacer llegar a los diferentes barrios más humildes de nuestro país, ¿no? Para que la gente pueda tener accesible a un bolsón con verduras, frutas frescas, carnes, para poder aliviar un poco la situación de la que está viviendo en estos momentos de crisis, ¿no? También en esta crisis hemos visto la falta de acceso a la tecnología en muchas de las comunidades. Los niños, la niñez está muy golpeada con el tema de que no hay escuelas, que no hay comedores. Entonces, a través de la organización lo que hacemos es diferentes materiales para que lleguen a través de la impresión hacia las comunidades a donde no tienen acceso, y somos los jóvenes los que estamos acompañando esos materiales, no tanto para niñez como para adolescentes. Otra de las cosas es que estamos llevando adelante en muchos barrios y en muchas comunidades los merenderos.
The effort you people are making, especially to narrow the gap between the consumers, the producers and the consumer, and also maybe trying to link the consumers and the producer directly, trying to limit the middlemen or the middle people who intervene in the food system distribution. Thank you so much. And I think with this now, I will move to Nettie Weber. I will appeal that please, we limit to 2 minutes so that it will enable us to listen to all the panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali, and good morning. It'll be difficult to do the 2-minute limitation, but let me just try. Let me just say that women have been suffering differentially from this pandemic. And in the women's constituency and women around the world recognize that the way we've had to deal with this pandemic is in fact exposing pre-existing systemic patriarchal inequalities, oppressions, racism, colonialism, and violence. The pandemic just exacerbates that. So the voices of women are very important here. We're the majority of food producers and the providers for our households. We are also the majority of caregivers, nurses, social workers, food and agriculture workers, teachers, And yet we're consistently overlooked in the policy discourse. So one of the things the women's constituency has done is we engaged researchers Jessica Duncan and Priscilla Clays to write a report on how food systems and the COVID is impacting us and our communities and our feminist responses and demands. So these interviews that they did and the research that they did really illustrated what many of us women live, and that is that we have complex interrelated roles, and there are complex layers of disadvantage that we suffer that are gender-based. Those are economic, we're often the most marginalized workers, and the marginalized workers, the frontline workers in agriculture and informal markets are the most insecure and have been the most endangered by the pandemic. And there's lots of examples, and some have been given, where the lockdowns of local markets, which are predominantly women's stalls, have been done, and prohibiting of travel during lockdowns, and that major supermarkets have stayed open. So women's disadvantages economically are job losses and the vulnerabilities have been exposed by this pandemic. And specifically, we're food producers, but all over the world, we are actually having more and more trouble accessing land and less control over land and food productive resources. And we're disproportionately doing care work. That has always been our work. Childcare, elder care, emotional care, and now when schools are closed, we're doing a lot of homeschooling. And one of the things that this has exposed, Ali, is that care work makes all other work possible. It's at the heart of how we can operate as societies and households. So women have been very adamant about mutual aid and demonstrating solidarity, working collectively to meet these challenges. And the challenges, as I've just named, are overwhelmingly large, but we have demonstrated that this is also an opportunity to build new forms of economic and social relations, and that now is the time when the care and the knowledge and the solidarity and the energy of women is crucial, and we need to be part of the discourse on policy responses.
Thank you, Nettie. Thank you. I think you are right. The COVID-19 has actually exposed the challenges of our food system. And as you said, women are the most impacted, because if a child doesn't eat, it is the woman who suffers the most. Like in my community, where there are crises, many have been displaced. So there are a lot of challenges when it comes to food.
The communities themselves did a lot of their own solutions. They worked together to do things such as pooling their money, setting up production of masks. They also actually shared food amongst themselves, which is a general practice, but we saw more of it this time. And finally, something quite different was there was a government social safety net where you had to register by phone. Communities were working together to get each other registered. And again, this was primarily targeted at women in the community, this government program. So we saw a lot coming from the communities to respond by themselves. And I think that this should be very much noted, that this is very much a women's led response that we saw going on.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think you have highlighted important issues. I think women are at the forefront, they suffer the most. And I think if they are even at the forefront looking for the solution, I think it will help us address most of the challenges women are facing. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think from now, I will hand the button to my co-facilitator, Nicole, to continue with the next aspect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali. That was an excellent points that were made. let's just remember that we need to speak a little slower for interpretation. I know it's tricky because we want to cover a lot in 2 minutes, but a lot gets lost in interpretation, and we want to make sure that everybody catches what you're saying. All right, so we will move to another question, and the question that I'm posing, that we're posing to the panelists here is, what should be the global response on COVID-19 and the role of the Committee on Food Security? We just heard and we know that the pandemic has shown the urgent need for governments to implement human rights-based public policies that will enable the actions and the proposals of smallholder food producers and food and agricultural workers and constituencies. And so one part of the question is, what should be the global response on COVID-19 and the role of the CFS? But also, what is your vision for food systems transformation? And what are your key demands for member states? So I will start by sharing it with Nettie, our sister Nettie. And then shortly, I'm also going to share the screen of some of the demands that have been put together through the Youth Working Group Declaration for member states. So I'll pass it to you, Nettie, and let's try and keep it at 2 minutes per person. And if you pass, I'll just start waving to you. So take it away.
Okay, again, 2 minutes is a severe limitation, but let me begin by saying that our position is that the CFS is the key platform where governments and other actors, social movements, can actually share their knowledge and together hammer out policy. And it's, for us, it's very important that the governance of be publicly accountable, and that governments take the lead on this in collaboration with social actors. And that's important because of accountability. The CFS is that policy space where that's happening, rather than in private sector boardrooms or in negotiations that exclude the key participants in our food systems, and women are among them, as I've emphasized. And those venues which exclude those voices always undermine our interests and undermine human rights and veer towards corporate dominance. So the CFS, it cannot be emphasized enough that a space where human rights is the framework, and where all of the actors, key actors in the food system, are around the table, is the primary space where we're going to be able to solve some of these global problems that reach down into our communities and our households, as we've just noted. So I just want to say that from a women's perspective, we're not satisfied that the CFS has made enough emphasis on and carried the ball well enough on the key issues we want: food sovereignty, agroecology, a human rights framework, the protection of the most vulnerable, and end to violence against women. All of those key demands, and many of them are listed in our report, have the possibility of being resolved at the CFS. And that's why we view that as the place where these things must be discussed, and where it's more than just experience and best practices sharing, it's actually policy directives.
Thank you, Nettie. That is excellent. I will pass it to our sister, Margarita. Marga, tienes la palabra.
Sí, ¿me puedes repetir la pregunta?
Sí, Marga. Entonces la pregunta es...
Hola, ¿se me escucha?
Sí, sí te escucho. Bueno, te lo van a interpretar, ¿ok? Ahí te va. What should be the global response on COVID-19 and the role of the CFS? But more important, Marga, if you can speak on what is your vision for food systems transformation and what are your key demands for member states? I will share my screen as well so you guys can all see the demands we've made. Go ahead, Marga.
Bien, bueno, aquí hemos hecho la declaración de la juventud sobre, digamos, algunas de las demandas que tenemos como juventud. Bueno, una de las cosas que nosotros habíamos visto, que la salud de la gente y del planeta sean tratados adecuadamente como interés público. Otra de las demandas que tenemos es el apoyo a los sistemas alimentarios territoriales, a los mercados territoriales y a las comunidades y a la economía comunitaria, ¿no? Es otra de las demandas que tenemos como juventud. La otra demanda es de los derechos y acceso a la tierra, a los recursos productivos como el agua, las semillas, el conocimiento y a los mercados locales y a la compra de los estados de los alimentos. Otra de las demandas que tenemos como juventud es a los estados es que la agricultura salga del OMC. Otra es reconocimiento de la agroecología y su difusión de la agroecología. La otra es la intervención, digamos, y la pública, digamos, de las infraestructuras para los productos de pequeñas escalas. Otra de las demandas que tenemos como juventud en la declaración es que se ponga fin a la discriminación estructural y que se remedien, digamos, las desigualdades de los estados, que los estados puedan proteger los derechos de los pueblos indígenas, de los pueblos negros, de las personas de color, las mujeres, los migrantes y la comunidad LGTBIQ+, y los discapacitados. Es otra de las demandas que tenemos como juventud. Demandamos, digamos, un proyecto, un mayor papel en el CCA y que el CCA desarrolle un conjunto de reglas, de prácticas para asegurar la participación y el compromiso compromiso significativo que tenemos los jóvenes del MSC, ¿no? Es una de las otras demandas. Y las últimas dos demandas son que asegurar el salario digno y el acceso a los bienes para las trabajadoras y trabajadores. Por último, la última demanda es el reconocimiento de los derechos de las y los migrantes de todo el mundo, ¿no? Esas son las 10 demandas que tenemos como el grupo de trabajo de la juventud del mecanismo de la sociedad civil.
Gracias, Marga. Thank you, Marga. I will pass it now. Let's hear from Gabriel.
Our vision for food system, food security and sovereignty without it. We live in a country with too much conflict in the rural area and too little investment from the government in small farmers' production. So one of our demands to our government is to create measures and policies to ensure their rights. In this sense, we demand our human rights to productive resources such as land, water, seeds, biodiversity, and knowledge consistent with UNDROP, as well as the territorial markets and solidarity economies. With a particular focus on the requirement
breaking up, Gabriel.
All right, and the rights of our children.
You're breaking up.
It's everything okay?
Okay, we can hear you now.
With the rights and the rights for children and community and education, we realize in a way that prioritizes health and give importance to a transformative education based in the educative lines of Paulo Freire. Another point, I think it's important, our work with the settlement here in Franca, Fazenda Boa Sorte, show us the importance to give visibility to social movements as MST, Movimento Sem Terra. It's a landless movement here in Brazil. This social movement, it's really important in the sense that they bring the popular perspective above the agroecological production. But even so, it's a criminalized movement that suffers preconception by our government and by our community. The CFS puts itself as a space where the diversity of point of views are considered, but when we speak in a democratic point of view, again, we have to put our attention in popular education because we believe that through emancipatory perspective as popular education is, that we can approximate this debate to the population, principally to a population that has low access to information. And to conclude, and here I talk about my group's perspective on a global analysis. The pandemic crisis shows us the urgency to fighting for a type of sociability that is not based on the has caused destruction and imbalance. I have time to speak.
I think we're in time. We're over.
Okay.
Thank you
you.
so much. Great points. Rodrigo? Oh, I saw your hand. Okay. All right. We'll share it with we'll now hear from Jennifer. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Okay. So from what we see in Pakistan, food systems need to be more resilient to disasters. They need to be fairer so that local farmers can make decisions quickly as per the emerging needs. And they need to be sustainable to reduce the likelihood of further climate change and disasters. And I think an agroecology approach will be key for this. CFS should be ambitious in their policy recommendations. And I think this is really a crucial time when people are ready to rethink food systems, both caused by the COVID situation and the lockdowns, but also because of the very visible effects of climate change throughout the world. But sometimes there's a will and there's a limited way or understanding of the way to do that. And I think that through CFS, member states can be provided with very specific guidelines that they can adopt. And I know that in Pakistan here, that there is a will, but it's the difficulty of understanding what to do and how to do it. Similarly, member states should be aware of the consequences of not acting and the links between the current practices and climate change and lack of resilience to the international crisis such as COVID. And such solutions need to be informed from the ground realities. And I really think that committees such as CFS, they are the best way to deliver such solutions. One where civil society and communities have a strong voice, and one where future generations can also have their say. And I think through this, then we can develop a system that is sustainable, fair, resilient, and also one that produces healthy diet and nutrition for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. What a great discussion. We honestly have a a very packed agenda, and these topics could just really, go on for a while. But I want to open it up to Mrs. Maria Abad Zapatero, and Mrs. Zapatero, I want to pose that you can also reflect and respond to the visions of the CSM representatives, the visions and the demands, and the question that we just discussed. What is your vision for food systems transformation, and what are your key demands for member states? And also I wanna pose. We have heard about the significant impacts of COVID-19 on women and girls, as well as different transgenerational impacts. And can you comment on this, and what should be the global policy response to those specific impacts? And you have about 7 minutes, but I will let you know when you're getting closer to time. Thank you for being here with us.
Muchas gracias, querida moderadora, queridos compañeros del mecanismo de la sociedad civil del Comité de Seguridad Alimentaria, queridos panelistas, queridos oyentes. Primero voy a saludar en español, una de las lenguas oficiales del Comité de Seguridad Alimentaria Mundial. Pese a ello, y también pese a que detrás de una lengua siempre hay una cultura, continuaré en inglés en aras de facilitar este último evento del CSA, cuya producción virtual, me consta, no es fácil. For the sake of clarification, I must say that I am a senior officer in the Directorate General for Sustainable Development Policies of Spain, but I am not the DG himself. Mr. Ferrero has intervened as key speaker earlier this morning in the gender event. Thanks then for the floor. On the first part of the question before, I wish I had a magic stick for the crisis. I can only aim to concentrate on my competences, on my civic and political rights and obligations, as well as my role at the household and as an individual citizen in society. The enemy is COVID-19 and its multidimensional consequences, and not necessarily the others. We need to fight this together. Also, and this is one of my professional crusades, I think we should constantly assess the evolving situation, being very, very conscious that due to the pandemic and movement restrictions, the gathering of evidence is even more difficult and slower than in other crises, and local situations are also diverse. We can extract lessons from last decade global crises, Sahel 2005, Southern Africa 2000, Corredor Seco, or pandemic such as the recurrent Ebola, HIV/AIDS that destroyed a full generation, or the combined cholera hunger crisis in Haiti. Those are all useful, but this is different. Regarding CFS, as very well stated yesterday by Mr. Tinsin Tanawat, the chair of the CFS, in the high-level event, CFS mandate is to elaborate voluntary guidelines for food security policies, investment, right to food, and now agro-food, agroecology, and soon gender and youth guidelines, based on the high-level panel of expert evidence-based work. Particularly, the CFS has produced already a guidelines on food security policies in crisis. But in the end, it is up to governments and multilateral organizations and multilateral financial institutions, civil society, and private sector to put them into motion. Spain, as member of the CFS Bureau starting next Friday, will indeed be pleased to do our best to reinforce and promote CFS job within its mandate and to push for the gender and the youth working lines with a right to food approach. The CFS, for us, and I hope for most of the people around this panel, is the most inclusive body to discuss policies on food security and nutrition, and should continue to be so. Lastly, on behalf of Spain, I would like to take the occasion to congratulate our colleagues from WFP, member of the CFS, staff and executive director for their Nobel Prize, and to hope them all the best on applying the food assistance approach in collaboration with the rest of the stakeholders. Regarding the question on gender and transgenerational approach for transforming agro-food systems. First, on gender, my point is not to technically speak on the matter. Why? My argument is an advocacy and awareness raising one, as I believe this one is one of the traits of the CSM events all along its history. Also, both gender and youth events have taken place these days. You have asked for a woman's voice. I cannot offer you a woman's producer voice, as I am not. I don't even live now in a rural area. I do not want to shadow the voice of those colleagues in this panel that are, even less to lecture. I am the product or fruit of the three main Mediterranean countries, even if being lucky enough to be a Spanish citizen and thus benefiting of the advances that my country has made and offered to the rest of the EU on women, gender, and LGBTQ+ rights. I truly believe that fighting against one discrimination means fighting for them all. Hence, just two stories from a humble agroeconomist engineer. After 30 years of dedicating myself totally or partially to SDG 2, for the second time, I'm invited to the CFS to talk on gender, matter in which I'm not an expert. Is it because I am a woman? Having said this, trust that I am delighted to be here. But this is to state as a proxy that also in the global governance, agricultural ministries, extensionists, teams, etc., women, not to say the agro-food industry, women are less. The second story goes back to the negotiation of the now called Food Assistance Convention, at the time Food Aid, when it was under transition. At the time, Spain was the presidency of the EU, and we negotiated with the Commission on behalf of the Union. In the Food Aid Convention, we were some women delegates, but in the International Ground Council that hosted and hosts, I believe, the FAC, out of 200 or 300 delegates, only two we were women. It was so overwhelming that I've left even the social event in the soiree because I wasn't comfortable. I leave it there. Two, regarding transgenerational approaches, a very, very interesting and absolutely necessary point, we need young, middle-aged, and the elderly in rural and peri-urban agro-food producing. We need access to land tenure, land, capital, capital, and political laws for us. For all of you have said this already. The rural and coastal territories need all of us, and the young and elder are the current and the future girls of the environment. Three, and last, we need to take advantage of cutting-edge research, development, and innovation, internet and ITC technology, knowledge of the environment, forests and coasts and rivers that only gives the experience, and also the knowledge of the ancestors of our different cultures. And this can only be done by incorporating half of the population, this is women, but also the elderly and the youth, and multiply discriminated minorities like young, poor, indigenous women and girls. The local location of the SDG and the actual landing of the 2030 agenda on the territories has been defended in the Sevilla Declaration out of the high-level summit facilitated by Spain last year, a work continued by others, particularly by the Global Coalition of Town and Village Mayors around the globe. The pandemic has made clearer two issues that were already there. A, the economy of carers, often unpaid at the household level, often mothers, grandmothers, girls invisible, but also poorly and informally paid domestic household workers. Teachers, nurses, doctors, nutritionists, often women. Two groups have been the new excluded in this crisis. The elder, so hardly stricken by this pandemic and its spillover effects, and the youngest that suffer the second global food and the second global economic crisis in a decade, plus local crisis. It is their right and their obligation to fight for their and our future. And it is ours, middle-aged people from middle income or upper income countries, to support all of their necessary voices. Thank you for the floor.
Thank you so much, María. Muchísimas gracias. Gracias por todos lo que compartiste y por estar aquí con nosotros. Y tomamos en cuenta todo lo que nos dijiste. All right, with that, I will pass it back to Ali. We will be hearing from Mr. Michael, Mr. Michael, the UN Rapporteur on the Right to Food. Ali.
Should I jump in? Or are we waiting for Ali?
It's okay, Mr. Michael Fakhri, please, you can go on. Thank you so much.
Okay.
We do have a question for you.
Yes.
Mr. Michael. We wanted to pose that same question of what role should the CFS play in a global response to the COVID crisis, and what should be done to ensure government responses to address systemic inequalities and ensure human rights. So share, if you can, response to that and anything else you want to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, everyone. I'm honored to be here today, and I'm happy that it's the youth and the women of the CSM that are going to have the final word of this 3-day event. I think that's quite right. So just to get to how I think the CFS, what role the CFS can play, I just want to build on the comments of Ms. Maria Abed Zapatero from Spain, and start with the dynamics within the CFS. Is interesting. It's not just what the CFS can do externally, but within its own processes. So for example, now that the CFS has put together a working group on the same time having to attend CFS events, webinars in different time zones, I don't think the CFS has taken into account how work is being unequally distributed within the CFS itself. And so if you are, for example, in a position of power, you don't have to take care of your children, you're from a rich country, you're going to dominate the CFS. If you're a woman, if you're someone who has to take care of your family, if you're from a poorer country, and you're trying to influence the CFS, you're weakened. So within the CFS itself, we're seeing inequality increase. Other things the CFS can do now, thinking externally, is since we're talking about a crisis of care and a crisis of work, I think it needs to develop a more formal partnership with the International Labor Organization. The International Labor Organization is the place to talk about work. It also has a democratic sensibility since it has a tripartite structure of unions, management, and national governments. And I think there's an excellent opportunity for the CFS to develop a formal partnership with the ILO. And I'll end on what the CFS can do. Also, what all the governments can do with the CFS is I think they need to reaffirm their commitment to the right to food, and they need to reaffirm their commitment to an autonomous civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism. Admittedly, I'm relatively new to the CFS. My mandate started May 1st, but I was disappointed that my work in the beginning was primarily defending why human rights is necessary. And I found this ridiculous. This is regressive. I shouldn't have to spend my time explaining why the right to food is relevant. I should be spending my time pushing to implement the tools and to solve the problem and to get to work, like the mutual aid groups have been doing, like the solidarity work that we've heard from the youth. These are the people that are working. Therefore, those of us in these international fora, we should be getting to work too, not defending human rights and arguing like we're arguing from 50 years ago. And finally, I'll end sort of, if I may briefly reflect on, I just came out of the last plenary, and there's something very interesting how it ended, almost visually. If you look at, I encourage you all, if you have the energy, to go back and watch it if you weren't there. But it ended with myself and Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who's the special envoy on the Food System Network. Two people from developing countries. She's a woman, she's a Black woman, and she was a refugee. I'm a man, I'm an Arab man from Lebanon, my country is imploding. We're both people that are fighting, not because of some theoretical idea. Both Dr. Kalibata and I are coming from a place of we're fighting because we know what's at stake. Where her and I agree is that climate change is a fundamental issue and the time to act was 10 years ago. Where we also agree is that smallholders matter and the youth matter. But after that, there's a fundamental disagreement. But what we're learning to do, Kalibata and I, it's an interesting relationship we're developing. And I'm starting to think of it in terms of coexistence. I'm not going to convince her that agroecology matters, that agency matters, and that human rights matters. She's not going to convince me that the path ahead is high-tech economic incentives and a multi-stakeholder process. Therefore, I think we're at a point where we have to learn maybe to coexist. And this is where I put my vision forward in my report on trade, on creating international food agreements. And now I'm thinking that the vision isn't necessarily a world. Unfortunately, I wish I could imagine a world that's all agroecological and all committed to human rights. But I think what we can do at best is buffer and protect ourselves from those forces that are going to undo our hard work. Can we create an international system of regional food hubs where those of us committed to human rights and living in good relations with the land and good relations with each other can protect ourselves from those other forces that are committed to high tech and almost ambivalent, if not against human rights. And I think that idea of coexistence and protecting ourselves from harmful forces might be the way forward. But admittedly, this is just a reflection with you coming out of the plenary. Thank you.
Those are excellent points. Mr. Michael, thank you. Thank you for sharing those and being with us as we close this event and share the reflections that you had. Those are very important. Well, we made it through. Can you all believe it? Thank you again for being with us. And we are going to open it up for discussion. We had great presentations. They had to be very condensed. We had an ambitious agenda, very powerful questions and responses. And so we want to open it up to the audience. We know there's some questions that have been sent and on the chat, but we also want to open it up to people in the audience to come up with some questions. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to read some of the questions that have been sent. We're going to open it up to the audience to see if there was any additional questions. And then I'm going to pass it to each panelist to respond to any specific question or questions and have your closing thoughts and remarks. And we'll have about 2 minutes per panelist. So let's start with the questions that have been brought up. One of them is directed towards Neri. What do you recommend in the CFS space to avoid conflicts of interest by those who are responsible for degrading the livelihood and resources of frontline peoples and promoting food products that lead to non-communicable diseases? And there was another question that has, yep.
This question points to something that others have mentioned, Michael particularly, but that needs to be reemphasized, and that is that there's a huge imbalance of power. And when you're talking about corporate agribusiness investor takeover and the trade, the international trade agreements have often actually promoted that and facilitated that. Those actors are in a completely different place than those of us who are on the ground trying to produce food on small acreages and feeding our families. And the impact of those players on us can't be underestimated. So the CFS space, let me just go back to something that Michael said. The CFS space is that space where that power should and must be balanced. And those actors have to be held more accountable. I can't think that we can allow this takeover, and the pandemic has emphasized this takeover of what are governance spaces by that sector, by those who are not actually invested in what the CFS reform document says, prioritizing the voices and the needs of those most affected by food insecurity, which is predominantly women and youth and marginalized communities. That the CFS space has to continue to focus on that and hold those other actors accountable. That's the role of governance, and monitor them and push back, struggle against that.
Thank you, Nettie. Thank you. And absolutely. So I will come back to the process that we're going to take here. There's a lot of questions coming in, and a lot directed, a few of them directed towards you, Mr. Michael. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to go through some of the questions and I'm going to read them out loud so interpretation can also have a chance to interpret it to the other languages. And then I'm going to call on the panelists so they can answer the questions and then have their closing remarks. So we're not going to answer the questions right now. All right. So one of the questions for Mr. Michael is from the UN Interagency Task Force on Social Solidarity Economy is hosted by the ILO. FAO used to participate but withdrew about a year ago. And they say they agreed that there should be a bridge with ILO, but we also need to be aware that ILO has also recently signed an agreement with the WEF. The corporate takeover of the multilateral institutions is creeping into all of the UN agencies. And so that's a concern. And another question is, thanking you for your comments, Mr. Michael, and also on the CFS plenary. Your emphasis on human rights, including those related to labor, is so welcome. A question on coexistence. How do you handle the immense disparity in power among advocates? And we had another question that I see a couple of us responded on the chat, but I'm also going to post it here. So interpretation also allows for others to respond with the help of the interpretation. What can we do as allies for Indigenous peoples to amplify their voices on food and livelihood needs and improvement of approaches for sustainable and equitable food systems? All right, I think those are the questions that so far have come on. And so I don't think we'll have a chance, unfortunately, to open the floor like we did on our past event and how we like to do. We want to hear from all of you that have joined us. Unfortunately, due to time, we'll just pass it to the panelists, a couple minutes each to respond to a question that you want to respond, and please also share your closing remarks. Let's start with you, Mr. Michael.
Nicole, please go with Michael. When you say Mr. Michael, it makes me giggle.
Okay. All right.
You should have said that at the outset, despite the graying hair. I mean, both those questions are related on the ILO and power disparity. And I think the solutions, we've heard the solutions and how to deal with it today from everyone here. It's not going to come from me. I've never seen in my work change, real effective progressive change come from the top. Historically, that's never happened. Change always starts with the people. Change always starts with social movements. And I think many people here agree with that. But I just need to put that as a starting point. So first, what we've heard is working in light of COVID. What's working is local action and local institutions. So when we think of government, it's not just our national governments. Governments include all public institutions, schools, hospitals, municipalities, as we heard from Brazil. And so the task for CFS can be to move beyond just national delegates, but thinking about how to connect with networks of these public institutions. How do you bring in, for example, if a country is committed to feeding its children, how do you bring in leaders of all the school districts and connect them with the CFS and connect them with the CSM? And so that CFS's tools and ideas and the right to food can be implemented on the ground by these particular public institutions. So when we think of government, it's not just one big idea. We have progressive opportunities on the ground with those institutions that do the work. Just the same in international institutions. So we can talk about FAO and we can talk about the ILO as big institutions, but we know we have allies and people committed to the right to food within these groups, within these big international agencies. So we can continue reaching out to those within those organizations. And that's the work I can do, is reaching out to those people that are already thinking in terms of human rights and solidarity, economics and politics, and strengthening that network and solidarity amongst us in the international level. And in the end, it's the solidarity work of smallholders and the youth. What I heard today in the plenary and what I've been listening to and seeing coming out of the Food Systems Summit, everyone is now trying to be the best friend of smallholders, and everybody's trying to be the best friend of the youth. And what might happen is breaking up these opportunities of solidarity. So governments, CFS, and each other, all of us have to continue strengthening each other and reaching out to new allies and continue this good work like today's panel. This is basic, fundamental community building work. We need to continue building our communities, helping each other, taking care of each other to be able to be strong enough to change the institutions. So it could be as simple things like we heard in Pakistan, feeding our neighbors. That's real political work. And taking turns. Sometimes I'm able to attend the meeting and put the energy and make the intervention. Other times I have to take care of my 4-year-old son, but I know I have allies and friends that can step in and help me when I can't be there. So I think I'll end on that spirit of friendship and solidarity today. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I will pass it, estimada María. Te paso la palabra.
Sí, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Thanks for the floor again. Well, a couple of things as final remarks. One is almost a question. Yeah, when I agree also with Michael and others. We should not phagocyte, and we should not gobble up the voice of others. Yeah, other people's voices. Yeah. When I hear private sector as a small firm, at the smallest, I always think, what is it? It is a small rural family farm, but private sector. It is indeed private sector too. Another thing is that it's not protected, but it is private sector. Therefore, we should also consider that they are private sector, but with other constraints. You have integrated family, power, economic, labor rights, etc. That is one reflection. Private sector always sounds like agro-industry, producer organization at the very more, yeah, but not small farming. We talk about private sector, and on the other side, small family farming. Okay, on trade, I really send my best regards to Michael, to the special rapporteur, because I think that, yes, we have to go further. And indeed, a fair governance at the multilateral, regional, and local and national level for food and agro products is key. Also, to implement right to food, and it also has to go to to regulate the markets of food commodities. So in that regard, I'm also optimistic. I think that it's tough to go back to defend the Human Rights Declaration, but also some work has been done. So all the very best to you and the rest of people that will be supporting you on your work. Count with Spain. Thank you very much.
Gracias, estimada María. Gabriel, please share your closing remarks and answer any questions that were asked.
Which question?
Oh, if you want to answer any of the questions that were posed by the audience, or just share your closing remarks.
Okay. Molly answer about Fome Zero programs. In Brazil, there is the program called Bolsa Família. This is this really popular program of income distribution, and it has so much popular support that it's really difficult to dismantle it. Some food with basic food of the Brazilian way of eating food, like rice and beans and some food, normal food we eat, it's distributed to people who need it. So this was really important program of the government of Lula, and it becomes so much popular that it's hard to dismantle. And today they are talking about a new form of doing this program. It's called Renda Brasil, the new program that it's being developed by the government, but it still is on the paper. And about another program that was put here, the PRONAF and the PAA are two programs that support family agriculture here in Brazil, but as I said in the initial of my collocation, the Bolsonaro dismantled CONSEA. CONSEA, it's the National Food of Nutritional Security Council. It's the federal council for food sovereignty. And without the CONSEA, the municipalities and the states cannot have federal response about these programs, such as PRONAF and PAA. So if these programs have some problem with these programs, they cannot have the federal response to regulate it. So it becomes really more difficult to have some answers about it. I think this was these two questions.
Thank you, Gabriel. And thank you for everything that you shared and being a powerful representative and voice for the youth in the CSM.
Thank you.
And in your communities. Marga?
Hola. Entonces, bueno, varias de las preguntas, bueno, todas las preguntas están en inglés, entonces me es más difícil poder leerlas, pero ahí, escuchando un poco de lo que hablaba Gabriel, Creo que nosotras como juventud estamos en un momento, bueno, la juventud siempre ha sido protagonista de las luchas y de la resistencia, ¿no? En diferentes etapas de la vida. Y creo que esa es nuestra tarea ahora, poder seguir acompañando y ayudando a las comunidades, a los pueblos, a la gente, poder pasarla de esta pandemia, ¿no? Pero también tenemos que seguir hablando de las luchas de los territorios, de las luchas de los migrantes, los derechos, el acceso a la tierra. Hay un montón de cosas que estamos haciendo la juventud en paralelo de el mundo que se paró por la cuarentena, entonces, por la pandemia, pero nosotras poder dejar el mensaje que vamos a seguir en el proceso de unidad y de organizar a más juventudes y de poder llevar alivio y esperanza, sobre todo a las familias tanto del campo como de la ciudad. La juventud siempre en la vanguardia de las luchas y bueno, y de la esperanza de la gente, ¿no? Entonces, es hacer el llamado a los gobiernos de poder acompañar esas luchas que se están dando en cada territorio, en cada país, y al MSC de poder que la juventud tenga cada vez más voces en esos espacios, de las cuales nosotras en este plenario no hemos expresarnos como juventud, como quisiéramos hacerlo de juventud, desde el mecanismo de la sociedad civil, ¿no? Poder tener más participación y poder seguir construyendo ese espacio de colectivamente y bueno, y siempre llevar la voz de los jóvenes del campo profundo, ¿no? Desde las comunidades campesinas, de las comunidades indígenas, de las comunidades pescadoras artesanales, y bueno, y desde las voces de las mujeres también.
Gracias, Marga, por darnos esa esperanza. Y es cierto, la lucha sigue. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Nettie and Jennifer. And I just want to say that I know we're over in time, and we really appreciate the interpreters for staying with us a little bit, and everybody else who has stayed with us from the audience, as well as the panelists. Okay, Nettie and then Jennifer, and then Ali and myself will close. Nettie, any closing remarks that you want to say? I know you answered the question already. Thank you, Ali. And just to close here, you know, we heard a lot of powerful truths and statements, and as we close this, you know, we heard from people power and the work that we're doing in our communities in the midst of the challenges that we're living, that we were already living those challenges, and now more with COVID. We also heard that we need to hold the member states and governments accountable, and so they fulfill their role as well. And also the co-optation of youth, right, was mentioned, which is real. As Michael was saying, you know, everything's about youth. But what we wanted to share here is our vision as youth of the civil society mechanism, as farmers, as pastoralists, as fisher folks, and as indigenous youth, our vision, which is different from the vision of the private sector youth, which is different from the vision of governments and what they, of member states, and what they think is best for us as youth. And so that's what this webinar and this side event was so powerful, because we got to hear from people on the ground, from the youth, and this is work that I just want to congratulate so many people. The youth working group has been meeting consistently in preparing this declaration and preparing for these meetings and in moving our vision forward. And the participation has been incredible as we continue to grow and strengthen. And so I just want to congratulate. I know there's so many people behind the scenes, including the CSM Secretariat and a lot of youth. But here You know, we're representing a lot of our communities, right? It's really, we gotta keep planting, we gotta keep harvesting, and we have to keep putting the seeds on the ground in the midst of all the challenges, including climate change. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody, and especially big props to interpreters. Without you, it would not be possible. Sin interpretación no hay revolución. So I want to give a big thank you to all the interpreters and everybody who made this possible and everybody who made it here today. Well, with that, we'll close, and I hope you have a great day and happy Rural Women's Day.
Muchas gracias a todos, especialmente a las mujeres rurales. Thanks, Nicole. Merci.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Modératrice.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Luca. Ciao. A presto. Thanks for the support.
Thank you so much.
Luca doesn't want to leave until everybody's out.